All right. Okay, welcome, John. Let's
Yeah.
uh let's hear it, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
So wonderful to see so many faces, so many people here. Hello, hello. Yes, so great. I mean, in terms of wonder, one thing for me that's still so wonderful is technology that we have.
Yeah.
Like what? Like we're all sitting in our own spaces, but we're here and we're connecting. And Josh and I were just talking about that connection with people. So I don't want to start with that acknowledgement of
Mm,
gratitude
mm.
for Josh for inviting me here, for each of you for taking your time, for joining us this evening. It's really amazing. I'm really thankful to share this space.
Yeah. So glad
And
to have you, John.
great, thanks. And that question, how did I come to do a PhD in wonder? When I followed the breadcrumbs that led to it for me, it really was. In hindsight, it could not have happened
Hmm.
in that sense. And all the way back to my youth, and I'll share a quick story of wonderment for me, and so much of my exploration of wonder has been in movement. And my mom tells a story. Well, I first told the story of when growing up, our driveway was quite steep, and the curb at the bottom was pretty big. And I was 5 or 6, and I would lie down on a skateboard, and I would go zooming down the driveway, hit the end of the curb. We were in a court, so it wasn't a big busy road. So don't worry about, because then I would hit it, the skateboard would stop, and I would go spinning out onto the road, and I would do it over and over and over. And I was on my stomach. And from the like physics standpoint, I had no chance of actually making it over the curb and but that wasn't the thing for me. It was just this exploration.
Mm.
But I didn't know my mom was watching. And she said she saw out the window, she saw me zooming down the driveway, hit the curb, go flying out onto the road, and her first instinct, and I said, thankfully, because mom taking care of me, was to run outside and say, that's dangerous, don't do it, this and that. But she paused
Mm.
and she watched,
Mm.
and she saw me get up, and she saw me look at the skateboard and look at the curb and try to she saw I was trying to play with it and figure it out. And she's like, yeah, it's not the safest thing, but it's definitely not, the most dangerous. So she just let me, do it over and over and over. And that story and that experience, like I said, that breadcrumb just continued that way. And I
Mm.
would explore the world through wonder, and it just kept opening, opening, opening. And how it became to do a PhD, at the end of my undergrad, I studied human kinetics, the study of human movement. And one of my mentors said, what are you doing next year? And I was competing at big mountain free skiing, which basically at the time was called extreme skiing. And my mentor said, well, no one's studying the psychology of entering those dangerous spaces, the mountains of Alaska, of Chile, of
Mm.
Western Canada, all over the world, and like deliberately putting themselves in this dangerous environment, other than like a war situation, um, to study what works mentally. What are the skill sets needed there? And I said, what would that look like? He's like, well, we'd create an interview guide and you'd interview your fellow friends and skiers and this and that. And I was like, oh, that sounds less like school and more like fun. And I'm going to do it anyways. So great. Like, I'll get a master's out of it. Sounds awesome. And then doing my master's, what struck me was every single person I interviewed, all sorts of different people, backgrounds, beliefs, everything. Every single one of them said that their movement experience with the mountains was a spiritual experience.
Mm.
Yeah. And
Mm.
I was struck by that. And
Mm.
it resonated with my experience. My own self was like, yeah, I know what you mean. But as a researcher, I said, tell me more. I don't know what you
Mm.
mean, right? To get
Right.
their experience. And one skier, Mark Abma, talk about a wanderer. This man is all wonder. He's amazing. And he said, I said, why would you use a word like spiritual to describe this experience? And he said, I don't know another word to describe something that has so much power, but gives so much love.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm not a horse person, but
Mm.
I've been on horses a couple of times, and talk about something that has so much power
Mm.
and can give so much love. So maybe that
Yes.
resonates with some of you hearing,
Mm.
that experience of a spiritual experience,
Mm.
with horses, nature, others, it doesn't matter. So
Yeah.
that was the end of my master's. I had zero plans of doing a PhD. And like more school, like I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
But when I handed my master's in, and it was just consuming me. My wondering is like, I wonder what else is there with this experience of human movement. And so then the next opportunity and the door opened to do a PhD and to deepen my connection. And again, the idea wasn't to do a PhD on wonder, it was to do a PhD on human movement. And it was in the process of doing that study that wonder, it kind of like just came through the pores of the experience. And then I was like, oh my God, it's of course it's wonder. It's always been wonder. And I'll share one more story of that to kind of wrap up this longer answer than maybe you thought for what led to a PhD in wonder. I was sitting with Mark, again, Mark Abma, and we were sitting on a cliff in outside of Whistler. And I asked him, I was like, what have you been wondering about lately? And he's like, whoa, what a question. And it just struck him and he just went quiet for a while and he just sat. He sat in wonderment and he just stared out over the lake and kind of just went off, and I just sat with him. And then in the silence, I'm getting goosebumps just remembering the story. This kid goes running by. He had a broken arm. It was in a cast, covered with a plastic bag, taped up, like full, 8, 9-year-old, just exploring life, wonderment kind of thing. And the kid goes running off this cliff. He goes, he just jumps off the cliff and into the water. And Mark goes, that's what I've been missing and wondering, that childlike sense. And so we spent the next hour just running and flipping off this cliff. We're both skiers, both, doing that. And in that experience, he moved in a certain way and he came out of the water and his eyes were lit up. And I was like, what just happened? And he's like, I need to move like that in the mountain. That was amazing. And I wonder if it's possible for me to do that. And he is like in Alaska, in a natural feature, like this whole thing opened up. And then that he was a key part of my PhD to explore that thread of wonder with him.
Amazing. I'm trying to remember how you said that again, and when you were connecting it with the horses.
Something that has so much power that gives so much love.
Yeah, that will speak to everybody here, because there's just something, there is a frequency, and I feel like that's going to be a grounding point for us, John, because there's something about the depth of what these horses offer, and that's what just draws us into relationships. So my focus is, what does it mean to be in relationship with, and to deepen that as far as those roots can go. And I'm very curious to see how that is going to attach to the wonder piece, because I feel like that's really what the essence of it is how do we dive deeper into what it means to be in true relationship with something. And that is what horses are. There's something so amazing about the fact that they are so powerful, but yet they're so full of grace, and the depth of relationship that can be there pretty much takes us to a different place. And I feel like that's probably, I was mentioning that earlier before we started, that there's these kind of universal ways where we can connect. And I feel like that's kind of it. It's like when you can just go deeper into that connection. So yeah, it seems like when I watch people and I work with people, it's as if life has somehow shut us down from this ability to reach into the space and think about possibility. And we just talked a little bit about possibility, and you were sharing a couple of things about wonder and possibility. You want to share more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks. And so one of the ways when being with wonder is, okay, well, what is wonder? And Josh was talking about that when we were like before the call, just about how we say it so much at times, like, oh, I wonder if it's going to rain today, or I wonder if so-and-so is going to show up for the party, or whatever that might be. And sure, that's an element of wonder. And Josh even said, like, we almost need another word. And the state wonder for me is a state, and part of the state of wonder is quite simply being open to possibilities. When you're in a state where you're open to possibilities, wonder helps. I say it's the master key. A master key that can open any lock in a building. Wonder is a master key to unlock you to more possibilities. So that can be a skill that you want to learn. That can be like Josh says, a relationship. If you have a horse, like to your horse or to your trainer, whatever that might be. One of the things that I work with is I call the rings of potential, and the inner ring is your known abilities, right? So I could ask you, hey, can you, I don't know, canter? I'm going to pretend I know anything about horses. And
Well
like,
done.
can you canter? And be like, yes. And you hear it in someone's voice. When they can do something, they'll say
Mm,
it with conviction,
mhm,
confidence. They don't have to fake it, it's there. And then if I ask you a question that's on the outer edge of your known abilities, the next ring out is your known possibilities.
mm,
How many people on the screen, maybe a show of hands, there's something, we'll keep it in relation to horses and to your horse riding and whatever your relationship is. How many of you know there's something you haven't quite yet done, but it's close, like you're close to
mm,
being there? Yeah.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
Okay. So inner ring, known abilities, next ring out, known possibilities. And that biggest infinite ring is unknown potential.
mm,
Josh, when you were saying, to deepen the roots of connection, you're doing
mhm.
this with your hands,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Expansion, and like your fingers are like the
Mm,
tendrils of the roots going out.
mhm,
So for me, I do think of it that way, where our known abilities, right at the edge of our known abilities and before our known possibilities, that's the growth ring.
mm,
That's the growth edge. And what is the growth edge? It's a series of doors. And what are those doors? Wonder. Wonder is that master key.
mm,
And so if you're in that moment where you're on that edge of known abilities and known possibilities, we can shut ourselves down so much with overthinking, with unsupportive thoughts, with messages, all sorts of mindset things come in there. What I love about wonder is it's always already available at any moment. All you have to do is ask a question. I wonder if
mm,
I can do this right now.
mm,
And right away, that creates a little bit more space. And instead
mhm.
of, I have to do this, I'm expected to do this, I can't do this, anything like that, I wonder if I can do this.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I will often talk about what if statements, and I
Mm,
feel like it's kind of maybe on a similar plane, possibly, because it's like the brains. A lot of times people will live in kind of these rigid negatives. We live in these kind of structured negative belief systems. But what if you could
yeah.
break? How would that feel if you could break through that? What if you weren't restricted to that? How would that feel? And maybe that's what that is moving into that expanse of possibility and unknown. But so awesome to put a bit more feel and structure to it, like, just how you were saying with those rings. That's very cool, very cool.
And what I love too about we were talking about, the work that I do, that's all I do is I open people to possibility
Mm,
through questions, through tools, through presence, through all sorts of stuff. But that's all I'm trying to do when I connect with people. And that can be for healing,
mm,
as a therapist, when I'm working with folks recovering from, whatever it might be. I work with all sorts of people from, injuries to psychological injuries, whatever that might be, just full, psychotherapy or high performance. And so wonder is a state of being, but wonder is also a skill.
mm.
And we were born into wonder, and most of us were educated out of it,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But it's a skill. At any point in our life, we can reconnect with that skill, we can deepen that skill. And when, I forget his first name, but Datcher, his last name is right. He wrote a book about awe and came out
Mm,
this year, and it's called Awe. It's a beautiful book. And he talks about a state of awe or an experience of awe then evokes wonder. And he describes awe as when we're in the presence of something vast and in something unknown, which I totally agree with. However, my work, so if we're in like an awestruck moment or something awesome, that could be like staring at the night sky and having the shooting star go by, right? The shooting
mm,
stars are awesome. That's an amazing experience. But for me and the clients I work with, if we're waiting for the shooting star, we have no idea when the shooting star is going to come, which is fun if you're just gazing at a sky.
Mm-hmm.
It's fleeting, it's fast. But when I work with a lot of Olympians, and for instance, there's the Pan Am Games happening in Chile right now. I work with a rock climber, and she's off to the finals tomorrow. Semis were yesterday. We had a call today. And all the work we do is to have our mindset aligned to deliberately enter a state of wonder for her climb. She can't be pre-climb hoping and waiting for a shooting star to be awestruck and then open to wonder. She needs to have tapped into the skill of wonder, and to know that when she's standing under that boulder at the highest level of competition, she's in a childlike state of wonder. What is that again? She's open to the possibilities in front of her.
Which that's what you mean when you say created a state.
Exactly.
Man, that's super cool. So a lot of the work that I will often do is that I will talk about stillness and meditation, as kind of a bit of a gateway to create a space. You talked about the skill of wonder. So I'd love to hear more about that. So I know, there's a certain path that I have in regards to how I would go into a creative space, or healing or whatever. I'm curious to hear, just if you would, a little bit about what does it mean to have the skill to wonder as a skill? How can we glean from that as a skill?
Yeah, great question. So majority of my work, I describe it as embodied mental training. And the mind, and trying to reclaim, what the mind means and is, because it's not just this like small little thinking part of our brain, right? It's our whole self. And so I use an acronym of SIFT, SIFT, and S is for sensations, I is for images, F is for feelings, and T is for thoughts. And we're sifting in and through this field of possibility, and those four letters correspond to the aspects of our mind, sensations, or our organic mind, or our body. I, the images, our imagination, the right side of our brain, the oniric mind, symbols, all that beautiful world, dreams, right? Huge part of our mind. F, the feelings, the emotions, our heart brain, literally the heart brain. And then, yes, of course, T, our thoughts. But so many folks have this idea of the mind as just being thoughts, so cognition and what we're thinking, and it limits then. So if wonder is a skill, and we want to improve our ability to tap into that skill, sensations, move. I'm working with a group of execs Thursday morning that's coming up. They don't know this. If one of you are going to be there, which I highly doubt, but anyways, they're coming over from Vancouver. Anyways, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to move like kids. We're going to spin on the spot. When was the last time you spun 20 times one direction, 20 times the other direction? Probably a long time. When was the last time you wiggled in weird ways and just moved your body in different ways? If we're talking about being open to possibilities, literally, if our body is more open, and I Qigong practitioner, I love Qigong as a practice of opening myself. But why do basketball players have like pre-shot routines before they hit free throws? Pitchers do different things that are like pretty weird movements most of the time. If we move our physical body in that way, we will be more open. And so if you're walking up to your horse, and let's say something happened in your life and you're nervous, or you're distracted because you're still thinking about that conversation, or you're doing a test and you want to pass, like if you're so much in your head, or you get locked, remember, master key, right, to open a lock. I wonder if I wiggle a little bit, if that's going to help.
So this is really pulling me to so then is there something so as kids, we wouldn't even consider it. You want to spin 20 times one way? Oh, how fun will that be? And now as we get older, I think there's two things. First of all, we think about the inhibitions of such an experience. We think
Yeah.
about my soreness and we think about all the physical limitations, but then there's also that limitation of, I wonder what people will think. I wonder. So would you say then that 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 movement somehow is associated to a bit of a mental liberation or a liberation of that space, but you almost
100%.
have to be willing to take a risk? So is there a certain risk associated, like a willingness to that, to put yourself out there a little bit, that actually opens the door?
Yeah, wonderful. Yes, exactly. So any of those doors, sensations, open your physical body, imagination, literally imagine what
Mm,
might happen, right?
mhm,
Feeling, allowing yourself to feel every and all emotion, and then thoughts, like asking questions. Again, I mentioned that right at the beginning. I wonder if dot dot dot. Any of those,
mhm, mm,
that's the skill of wonder to be able to do that. And one of the elements of the childlike sense of wonder is that willingness to play. And play is to risk, to be
mm,
vulnerable, to fail, to try, to make mistakes. It's intrinsically motivated, right? Kids, like you said, kids just do it. I have a 7-year-old and a 16-month-old. So I'm just like steeped in childlike sense of wonder.
mm,
And it's the best. And I was walking side by side with my son down the street, and there was a pole that it was kind of just on his side. And as we're walking, without stopping, he just spins around the pole 3 times mid conversation, like almost like gets like slingshot out beside me, keeps talking. I didn't acknowledge it, to him because it's so like natural. But in my mind, I
mm,
was like you just said, Josh, he didn't think that. There was
mhm,
no planning. He doesn't care
mhm,
if anyone thought. Like it was just, to him, it was the most normal, natural thing to do. Why? Because it was an impulse and
mm,
a wonder that just, and kids can be so tuned in to allow that
mhm,
impulse and that wonder to come through. That's what I
mm,
mean. We're born into that. We all
mhm,
were steeped into that space, and it's still there. That's one of the
mhm.
biggest message. It's not like, oh no, like that left when I was 5. It's
Right.
still there, but the skill of tapping into it
Mm.
is needs revisiting.
I just love that because I feel like there's a permission granted there, John. Like this, there's a permission to just that I think we can all do in so many ways. It could be physical, it could be mental, it could be verbal, to just reach out into the space a little bit more. And what it brings to me is it brings really quickly to me certain areas of restriction, of where by making certain choices, it really starts to make that world smaller. And then, I think for a lot of us, you end up wondering why certain patterns repeat, or,
Yeah,
things don't end up changing, but it's because we start to live in a certain mindset where we're not opening our space to something new. And there's a lot of self-preservation probably fuels bottling up the power of wonder, or the power
mhm,
of creating new space or possibility.
mm,
And the mind is so powerful on that scale, because we can move so much energy by our thoughts. So man, I think the thing that strikes me is the permission that is granted, and almost in everyday tasks.
yep,
Just it could be so small, but you're almost, instead of turning left, you're turning right.
yeah, yeah,
Just by that decision. That's Man, that's very cool.
yeah, yeah. No, well said. That's beautiful. And when, like I said, my initial study was around human movement, and so much of physicality and embodiment, and very, like I said, then obviously my pathway was more the spirit within the physicality. But early on in my research, came across this beautiful book called The Primacy of Movement by Maxine Sheets Johnson, and it's like this thick and
Mm,
it's amazing. And she mentions at one point that when we're born into this field of possibility of movement, we have, it was something like 4,000 different ranges of motions when we're infants. And just think about the wiggles, that babies
mm,
make, all those things, and they're spontaneous, and they're all different planes of movement, like thousands of these opportunities within this field of possibility. And then by the time we're 10, even sooner, by the time we're 6, it's down to like 400 from
wow.
thousands. And by the time we're adults, it gets restricted even more. This is just the physical plane. This isn't our imagination or thinking. This is just
Mm,
physical. And that's how we can tell it's someone we know from a distance from their walking gait,
mm,
right? They walk a certain way, and we're like, oh, there's Jane from, however far away, because we walk in the same way, we sit in the same way. And as adults, we just get it narrower and narrower and narrower, to a
mm,
detriment of our health, really,
mhm,
but also to the detriment of playing with possibility, playing within this field. So when you wiggle and you accept that invitation, and like I said, I don't know, these corporate execs, we'll see. I'm gonna deliberately bring in weirdness and
mm,
deliberately bring in things to hear their restriction.
mhm,
And I
mm,
love how in SIFT, I love how T is the last. I
mm,
love how thinking is
right.
that last part of the mind, and the body, and the emotion and the imagination is there before.
Mhm,
But I'm going to guide them through that, and like, yeah, be aware of those mental restrictions. And the story that really illustrates it for me, and I absolutely love this, is one of the Canadian biathletes. I've worked with Biathlon Canada for many, many years now. And when I introduced the Wiggles, and the Wiggles is a Qigong practice, ancient practice. And it literally is just Wiggles. I just call it the Wiggles. Qigong, ancient Qigong masters did not call it the Wiggles. Uh, but it makes people smile, makes people laugh. It already starts opening it up. And so I'm introducing it to, these are the national biathlon team, and, Olympic athletes, and, serious athletes, all that stuff. And so we start wiggling, and I can see the tightness. And
mm,
some of the tightness is actually from the thinking. This is
mhm,
weird, but other people think it, not their bodies being restricted from their bodies, but from their thinking. So we do this, and then people got into it, and they opened up, and then the laughter and the breathing, and they opened to, a bigger field. And one of the athletes, kind of tongue in cheek, just, over her shoulder, said, like, what, you think I'm going to do this at like the start of the Olympics, kind of thing? And I said, it's a tool. If you need it, yeah. And in that moment, there was no way
yeah.
they were going to use that tool at the start area of the Olympics, with thousands of people watching, maybe even hundreds of thousands internationally. If it was her time to start, literally like a camera in her face. Fast forward to the next Olympics, and she is so nervous. She drops her rifle, which is like the first time ever, in her career. And she bought into all this work. She was doing all sorts of great work already. And she stops and she laughs out loud, because she's like, I'm about to wiggle. And she knew it was the tool she needed. And she thought back to her resistance and the whole thing. And it just brought a laughter to it, or smile. And there she was, start area of the Olympics, only person, right? Next person to go. The whole world's watching, or whoever's watching of the world of that. Obviously, it's not the whole world. And she's there wiggling, just looking like a weirdo. Uh, the other part of my answer to her tongue in cheek was my tongue in cheek, is like, what, you think you don't already look weird wearing spandex with a rifle on your back, skiing as hard as you can to hit targets? Like, come on, what's not weird about that, right? And more importantly for me, it worked.
Mm,
Her field expanded. And what is pressure in a can? It's a certain amount of, like, bubbles within a can, right? And if you shake it up and the bubbles expand, then there's more pressure.
mhm,
But that same amount of bubbles in a huge can, there's no pressure.
mhm,
So she
mm,
expanded her
mm,
and that pressure, or the emotion, the energy, everything was still there, but there was no pressure.
mm,
And she went out, she hit every target, she had the best race of her career to that date. And of course, that is a combination of many, many factors. But
right.
afterwards, she said, for sure, wiggling was a tool to access the skill of wondering. And again, wonder being open to possibilities. She was narrowing, maybe even to the point of a panic attack, with the amount of
Right.
pressure and tension that was being built up. And then within a couple wiggles, it all changed.
It seems like, just based on the mind, and you were talking about gateways earlier, that when you get to a place where you're about to implode, and then there's such a big decision that happens there, and okay, so we see this with horses. We do in my work, this relational perspective. It's really pressure is a big thing. How do we handle pressure? How do our horses handle pressure? And in a lot of ways, our self-preservation would encourage us to handle pressure in a very linear way. We're going to run from it. The horses run from it. You want to save yourself first. And it almost seems like, because this is just really just is messing with my brain. I just love it. But this idea of using your body that way is another way to almost grant permission to the possibility of something new, of a new mindset. But it seems like there's something about the vulnerability of it too. Like, I feel like the word vulnerability needs to be placed in this, because that's a liberation. Because you're either, if you can't move, you almost have to ask yourself the question, what is it that's stopping you from moving? And then to recognize that the actual movement, the embodiment of that movement, is kind of what liberates you to the newness of possibility, because you're putting yourself into that vulnerability. I know Brene Brown talks about vulnerability, and I almost look at it now like it's a superpower when you can enter that space. But this just adds another facet to that, because what we want in the end is, I want our horses and us as humans to first off observe what we do with pressure, to see that, because it becomes a massive restrictor. So in horsemanship, the way horses would respond can create fear, which then makes our world small.
Right.
But we also do that in our own heads. We'll do that. We'll observe pressure a certain way. And I think as adults, we get more and more restricted because we buy into patterns, and then our brains get connected to those patterns. But to almost see, I have a good friend, her name is Carrie Lake, and she does a lot of very cool non-linear work on healing and growth. And she did this one time in one of the courses that we did together, where she actually got up and she just started moving. And I thought it was like so cool, but it just like kind of adds another facet to the vulnerable liberation that happens when you say, I am not going to be restricted inside of my body to what my confines tell me to do. And it's like that almost opens up scope for a whole nother level of success. It's just kind of, I love it when things kind of tie other things in, and you can kind of see the spider web grow. That's really neat to think that. And I also thought that when you had thought at the end of Sift, that was like, whoa, I wouldn't have put it last, because I think a lot of times we think about liberation of thought as primary almost, maybe. Hey.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And so what would be an example of that moment of pressure for one of your students? And like, is it their own pressure that then the horse is feeling? And what might there be pressure around? What is opening in that moment? Is it a learning opportunity? Is it an examination opportunity? What's going on? Paint me a bit of a picture there.
Yeah, I think there's going to be two sides to it. On one side, there's the pressure of what the horse is going to do. So we in our own heads are unsure. Maybe a horse has a pattern of certain responses, and that's really what the work in this kind of relational perspective does. Is it's like, what does it mean to be in relationship with what a horse needs? So why would a horse become upset or bothered? And that's kind of our goal. But many of the pressures are, how's my horse going to respond, and am I going to be safe? So it can almost go to safety really quick. And then there's also the internal pressures. There's the crazy thing about horses, and in this horse world, a lot of times people will identify their value based on the way they work their horses. So acceptance and judgment they unfortunately kind of infiltrate the space, because people are trying to do right by their horse, but then the horse is kind of the physical expression of their value almost. So there's a real deepening in our work to really liberate ourselves from that space of, you're doing your best, your horse is doing their best, and your value is not attached necessarily to the moment of what your horse is able to achieve. So the physical representation of the horses and how the horse is performing or feeling or doing becomes a pressure for people, right. And the other part is horses will very quickly give you a beautiful mirror of what's going on for you, right. Because they don't have anything else planned. They don't have anything else going on. So they're just interacting with you, and they will very quickly reflect kind of what's happening. So there's really a deep growth piece to that. So horses can be very exposing.
Yeah.
So I think there's what the horse might do, and then there's what's happening within us as we're trying to kind of ask the horse questions and succeed on the things we want to do. And I think it really creates, that's where the word vulnerability and exposure, exposing us, like there's a level of being exposed, and then people wanting to succeed and do right by their horses. Everybody in this meeting would probably say they would do anything to do right by their horse.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love it. That's
Yeah.
so
So
cool.
I think there's probably a variety of factors,
Yeah.
but it all comes down to like a really good-hearted desire to do right, to help the horse, to make the horse feel safe, to do right through ourselves. And that actually creates more pressure in my mind than if you were just kind of footloose and fancy free. It's why we see kids having a lot more fun than most adults because they're not putting all those pressures on themselves.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it, Josh. It's so great. Yeah, and so part of that, the skill of wonder, and we're just on S, right now in terms of one
Ah,
of the doorways of the mind, right, to
mm,
open and to be liberated in that space. And part of the reason I ask is so my my company, my work's called Free Flow, because the bottom line is to free up the flow
mm,
of of your body, of your mind, of your imagination, of your sift. That's it.
so
That's all
good.
of it, right? And that if we are wanting to expand from our known abilities into our known possibilities, we will enter the unknown.
Mm,
That is essential. Otherwise, we stay in our known possibilities because we know it. So this is where students can get super frustrated, where they're like, oh, I'm not improving, or I'm improving too slowly. And for me, it's like, what's your relationship with the unknown, which includes what's your relationship with fear, which includes what's your relationship to being vulnerable.
mm,
And so wiggling, and in that moment where there's pressure, maybe around the horse, walking up to it, whatever, one of the elements of, okay, if I want to enter the unknown and I do so within a more accessible experience, wiggling. If I really give myself to wiggling in a way that I don't even really know where my body's going to move next, then I'm
mm.
deliberately entering the unknown in an easier, more accessible, safer. I don't know why I put quotations because it is safer. Like if I just wiggle by myself and open my space to
Yeah.
possibility there, I've already entered the unknown. I'm already in
Mm,
a more expanded field of possibility. And this is what I mean. This is the rock climber tomorrow of her entering that state to go and climb. Your students, yourself entering that state to then apply, and it's not even apply, it's invite the
mhm,
horse into that
mhm,
state.
mhm,
And if we want to enter the known possibilities and even unknown potential of again, this could be a skill, this could be a sequence, this could be experience, it could be anything, whatever. We'll probably talk towards the end of like, are you wondering, and what are you wondering about? If wonder is a skill, what are you directing this skill towards?
mhm,
And
mm,
so you cultivate this ability to be in a state of wonder, to be open to possibilities. You do it as your, pre-comp routine, your pre-performance routine, your pre-learning routine, and then you invite the learn, right? And so that this is what I mean, where once you continue to cultivate this skill, then you invite, whatever in. And that what you're saying is that uh that experience of vulnerability, being exposed to the unknown. How awesome is that? How fun is that? How wonderful is that?
mhm. Yeah, and just I think that, I think sometimes the word, vulnerability and being exposed to the unknown for a lot of people, that's gonna it could if you're not looking at it with the right mindset, if you're not thinking with a freeing mindset, that can start feeling almost scary.
Yep.
But this thought of that there's a way, this is what's really getting me. It's so cool. We this idea that movement and vulnerability, just the idea of movement and vulnerability. My wife has a saying in our kitchen, and it says this kitchen is made for dancing. And and it's almost like that's kind of what it is. It's kind of like free form, everybody just gets silly,
Love.
but yet it's totally liberating. And I never really, obviously I think I'm going to use this quite a bit more now because I didn't really understand the power of physical movement and how
Mhm.
that kind of was a gateway to unlock. Like, that's really great information. And the great part is it's actually so simple. Sometimes these tasks of change can be, seemingly very complex. They're very complex, but this is such a simple principle that has so much impact.
Yeah. And they need to. That's so other elements of my work, it's called work for a reason. It better work.
Right.
Otherwise, you
Right.
can't call it work. It's not work if it's not working.
Right.
It's something else, right?
Mm,
Right. So it's like, are we
very cool.
working? Like, great, let's work. And I always say that to my clients, myself, like, and we'll have that as like, is our work working? And if
Mm,
yes, awesome, let's identify why, keep going. If no, let's identify that because it's got to work. Otherwise, it's not work. In
yeah.
therapy, therapy should yield more freedom and health and connection as
Mm,
a therapeutic experience. High performance should yield greater expression of yourself. If those things aren't happening in those areas, it's not working.
yeah. Yeah.
And so to open to and I can feel it already. It's like inside, it's like, okay, we got to go to deep wonder because
Yeah.
it's like it's
Yeah.
going there. Before we do, I'll go with that first, kind of Tarantino it a little bit, where it's like the deeper you wonder and the more expansive it is, the more you open to the force of possibility, not just
Mm,
the possibility, but there's a force to it. And so situations get more and more complex. Olympians who have followed their wonder to the point where they're standing at the start line of the Olympics, that's a complex environment.
yeah.
Uh, a skier who's standing on top of a mountain in Alaska looking down a couple thousand feet that they can't see because it falls away because it's too steep and there's avalanches, that's a complex environment. And if their mind is freaking out and closing, you can't fight complexity with complexity.
Mm, hmm,
It has to be simple.
hmm. Right.
Because if it's complex, those parts of your mind, they're going offline.
Right.
That's why
Mm,
breath and wiggles, or breath in any sort of movement, dancing, anything, that's a doorway, and you get a
mm,
little more space, and then from there, then you can get all those things back online and be fully firing.
mm-hmm. Hmm. A cool thing with horses, and this is very obvious quite quickly, is when we're in any kind of self-preservation state, when you're with or riding a horse, you're trying to dance with this creature because you're trying to take two beings and let them become one. And it's when two beings become one that I say often that the horse is granted the brilliance of our mind, and we're
Mhm.
granted the power and speed of their being. And when we
Wow.
trust each other with those two, it becomes this just ridiculous combination, and it's like they're safe with us, and we're they trust us with their power. They don't use it for themselves, but we don't use our brain against them. It's like we're all being blessed by this combination. But what people struggle with is they can't release themselves physically to the movement of the horse. But it's when they do,
Mm.
when you can move with the horse and not hold anything within yourself and allow the horse to move you. So there's times when we'll just doesn't even matter where the horse goes, just go
Yeah,
with them,
yeah,
just and trust that. And I think that kind of touches that, and I just didn't have verbiage for it, but the feeling of that when you just release yourself to the movement of the horse, or this is another thing, speed. When you can release yourself to the speed of the horse, when the horse wants to move and you allow them to move, it's like there's something that changes because you're letting yourself go. But it's a physical movement. You're act because you're moving with the horse, but there's that
no.
release to it. So, anyways, it's oh man.
Oh, gorgeous. Thank you for sharing that. That is so, I don't know what that feeling is with a horse, but I know what it is with a mountain. You just described like my experience skiing, with a mountain at certain
Mm,
times. And with clients I work with, especially, Olympians and folks like that, would be, I'll often say, when have you been able to let your body move your body?
mm,
And what I liken to that with what you just said is like, when have you let the horse move your body?
yeah, right,
Like horses
right.
move your body, right? And like just fully give yourself to that. And it takes skill though. Like if yeah, there's a whole learning,
Mhm.
experience with that as well to get, because I think what you're really describing is this. When we talk about peak performance, it isn't like, oh, here you won some award for what you did. It's that
Right.
it's the attunement
Yeah.
to more than yourself, and whether
Yeah.
that's a horse or a
Yeah.
mountain
Right.
or another team, if there's an opposing team or whatever it might be,
Mhm.
when there's that connection and that attunement with what's going on, that to me is peak performance and peak experience. And it doesn't have to be at the Olympics, of course. It can be in our own everyday, experience, thankfully.
Amazing. So with not an intention to dull it down, because I feel like I'm sure you could unpack this for hours. So when we say sift and you say skill, and would you say then that the wiggles is a skill? Is that like what you would put into skill if you put kind of define the four pieces? What would a skill be that people could kind of just kind of use? And then what would an image be? Like what, if you would.
I love this, and I've been breaking it down this way. So first, let's talk about a hammer. And what were you talking about? Hammer. Okay, so the skill is hammering. The tool is the hammer. And then the techniques, you can use the front of the hammer, the back of the hammer, the side of the hammer, like all these techniques. So the skill we're talking about is wondering. Being in a state of wondering, being open to possibilities, right? That's the skill. The tool we're using is our mind. And one way of taking this very complex thing called our mind and having some structure to make sense of it is sift our sensations, images, feelings, thoughts. That's, the tool we're working with. Wiggles is one strategy, is one technique to then use the mind to be in the state of wondering and to open to that. And so now when we're talking about tools and techniques, it's wiggling, it's walking backwards, it's writing with your other hand, it's spinning a couple times. If we're just talking physical, if we're talking eye and imagination, it's using mental imagery, it's having someone describe something, it's remembering the most beautiful ride you've ever been on in your life, which me even just saying that maybe conjures up some images. And I can see people moving even with me just saying that. Feelings, again, just allowing the full spectrum of your emotions. So if you're scared walking up to a horse, I'm allowed to be scared right now. Whatever the emotional spectrum is, every single emotion, think of that, every single emotion and combination of emotion is a technique for being in a state of wonder. Talk about doorways. Isn't that amazing? Every single emotion you ever feel is a doorway to wonder with that mindset. And then every single thought, there's an ancient saying that in Bonpo Tibetan Buddhism, they say we're going to have 84,000 thoughts and movements of our mind every single day. And by movements, they mean emotions. They mean everything we're talking about with SIFT. 84,000. I don't know who is tasked to count that. I don't know how accurate they are, but the point is we're going to have a lot, right? And so what I'll say is then from that lens, we have 84,000 doorways as techniques to enter a state of wonderment. And I'll keep saying it. What is wonderment? Open to possibilities. Every single one of those can open us to possibilities or close them to. How wonderful is that? How amazing is that? That's awesome.
So the skill is being open to possibility. How many ways? Okay, so that's very cool. So then that's the skill set. To think of it like you're getting good at staying open to possibility to unlock your brain. To unlock your whole being. Okay, very
cool. To unlock your whole being, to do what? To connect more to some of the words that you shared, to connect into your horse, to connect to the land, to connect to the weather, to connect to the energy source, like connect to realms you can't even conceive of right now.
Yeah, it just gets me going because so you said you're skiing with the mountain. And that's I think something that resonates, and you and I talked about this, or we were sharing before we started, but I feel like when you connect with people, there's a frequency, but I feel like there's this deeper frequency on the earth that just kind of draws us into what it means to be in relationship with, because that's the thing that draws most people with their horses, especially people that are drawn into this kind of style. It's what does it mean to be in this beautiful, pure relationship with our horses? And there's something so beautiful about being able to release, and everybody wants to, but there's always this challenge to go ahead and actually take those steps. And I feel like the brain practice of this is so beautiful, because just opening yourself to wonder or what ifs and then having movement, those are really simple practices that are actually very powerful.
Yeah.
Like it's not, they're very powerful when you start putting it in the words you're sharing. Man, uh, because we all desire, there's there's that thread that seems to flow between when I hear you talking about skiing and you're with the mountain. It's like, yeah, you could just replace horse for that, because that's really what, but there's this draw. And I feel like that draw is that, what does it mean to be in beautiful relationship with, where we are not fighting against the flow. We're not a force against it, which can be self-preservation, fear, past traumas, or whatever. But then the practice of just allowing your body to move and flow with a thing is unlocking you from it. That's beautiful. We spend a lot of time in the horses. I talk about body mapping, and we will actually go through the map. We'll map the whole horse's body, and you'll end up finding out where they store their trauma. And then through feel and frequency, you can start unlocking the trauma that's stored in the horse, and that releases them into this most beautiful being. The beauty of horses is that you can't kind of whisper this in their ear to go ahead and do these things. They do them when they feel right, and they lock up when they don't. But when the horse is locked in their trauma, they are guarded, defensive, and not very appealing to look at. But when they're released from it, it doesn't matter. Everyone sitting in the fence, anybody watching would look at the horse who is liberated from their tension, from their whatever. And it's just beautiful. There's less talking, there's more observing, and it's just awestruck. We're awestruck by the beauty, but it's when they're released from that tension. I'm just so struck by the power of movement, but observed in that perspective. Yeah. And then the gateway of that's my brain is exploding a bit. It's very exciting.
That's great. That's great. That's like I said, that's my job. The
So cool.
possibilities. And
Yeah.
one of the things I'll offer with that too is I was working with a client, and they were saying that they were performing very scared. And I said, okay. And their vision was there was a problem with the performance, and they wanted to work on how do I, focus on the performance side more. And it's like, okay, cool. I just want to get a better sense. So tell me a typical day, because I wanted to see what was going on beforehand. And they talked about getting to the performance site like way earlier, like weirdly early. And I asked, I was like, why are you getting there so early? And they said, I'm afraid that if I got there later, da 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 da. I was like, okay. And then they did something else, but the number of times they said they made decisions out of fear. And I said, oh, so you're performing scared and you're preparing scared, but you're not aware that you're preparing scared. And you think that you can show up early because you're afraid this will happen. You'll warm up a certain way because you're afraid this will happen, all this stuff. But then you think all of a sudden you're going to be able to switch to this liberated, released, relaxed state. And it's like, no, bring that in early. And one of the things we did, so simple, show up at a normal time, show up with your teammates. Don't be 3 hours before them, because that cognitively was a trip for them the first time they showed up, because in their mind they were really late for the fear-based side.
Right.
But because they were rewiring. And I always say, are you making decisions out of freedom, love and freedom, or fear and restriction? And so if someone wants to have that state like you're talking about of being able to release with the horse, then release 10 minutes before you go, by wiggling, by moving. Even talking sometimes helps, because you're just moving energy, you're getting that through. But do something where you can feel what it feels like to be released and relaxed in your own body, even a little bit. And that door then is open. And I gotta come out and hang out with y'all and your horses, because I gotta see this live. Like, I'm seeing so much reactions. Like, I wanna learn, from this. And for me, it's like all this great lab. I call it the Wonder Lab, because it's let's test this and try this. And but that would be that message of like, if there's a state you want to be in and that would help your relationship with your horse when you're with the horse, access that state through sifting in whatever way that is, before you get close to the horse, because then you're more likely to be in that state.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So could you just one more time go through your acronym? So SIFT stands for
Sensations.
sensations,
I is images. And
images.
images is your imagination, more the symbolic mind, giving yourself permission to dream. It's creativity. It's the right hemisphere of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
F is feelings, and it's more the emotions. And so that's the heart, and
Mm-hmm.
that's all emotions.
Mm-hmm.
There's no bad emotion. All emotion is beautiful and needed. We get neurotic with it. That's a different story, but all emotions are, different color. And then T are thoughts. That's more of what we think of our mind, our thinking mind, rational mind, analytical mind. And one of my teachers and dear friends is a Bonpo monk. He got to Canada somehow, when China was being taken, or sorry, when Tibet was being taken over by China. That's a whole other story that we need a whole way more than an hour to unpack.
Mm-hmm.
But he always says, one mind, many locations. And it really came from this beautiful connection where he moved to Canada and he was learning English, and the English teacher was just pointing at stuff and saying, lamp and cup and computer, and then pointing to the head and said mind. And then he was, just parroting back, and he pointed to his heart and said mind. And she said, no, mind. He said, no, mind.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, no, you don't understand mind. And he said, no, you don't understand
Uh-huh.
mind. To his heart. So
Mm-hmm.
one mind, many locations. The whole physical body, our heart and emotions, both hemispheres of our brain. Like it's all these beautiful doorways to being in a state of wonder.
Amazing. Wow. This is very liberating. Yeah. And I feel like great information, great work. This is something that I've often talked about in my work, is that the beauty of excellent work uh, is actually simple, and it's shedding all of the unnecessary stuff we've put over top of it.
Right.
The work isn't actually, almost. I think there are skills to develop. There's knowledge to learn. We have to put ourselves to the task. But it seems like we had way more of this when we were kids, but yet we somehow clouded ourselves by putting a whole bunch of other things on. And the skill that we need to develop is actually work that allows us to liberate ourselves from uh, the heaviness that we've added, the effects of life. And I think we're not asleep to the fact that life is not always easy.
Yeah.
But yet that process of walking through that to a space of using our experiences as wisdom, but also allowing ourselves to be liberated. Man, it's just so beautiful. It's so beautiful. I can't wait to put some of this into practice. It's
Yeah,
so
yeah,
cool. So
me
cool.
too.
Yeah, right.
Me too. And that's why my website is Free Flow Practice.
Right.
Free flow is the state and the experience, and it's practice. And what a beautiful practice, to be engaged with, and what beautiful work.
Yeah.
And I guess to everyone, Josh and I, when we were preparing to invite you all into this convo, we were like, do we open it up to questions, and how are we going to manage that? And we're like, well, we have an hour. And Josh and I, someone said to me once, with dear friends, you never run out of conversation, you just run out of time. And reconnect to the next part of the conversation. And so we were pretty clear that would happen. So I did notice a couple things pop up with chats. I haven't watched or anything. We decided that this one we would, connect, chat, share, and then to see if we wanted to open to questions or other things like this in the future.
Yeah.
So I don't know, just
Well, why
wanted to
don't
mention.
I'll just read a couple that have come up, because there's a couple of good ones. I would also like to make sure when we wrap up that we'll just do a couple here, but I would really like for you to share, John, a little bit about what your practice is, and like how you work with people. What does it look like for people to get in touch with you? That kind of thing. I'd love to be able to share that. Betsy said, this is really neat. I wonder if the arc is that children live outside of time. Midlifers are owned by it, and the older people, if they're lucky, learn to reject it. And so we forget about wonder and wonderful movement while we're in the middle because we don't have the time for it, and then have to work to rediscover it. Maybe movement expands time.
Okay,
Pretty,
so
pretty cool.
here we are. We're going to be here for another couple hours. There, as we unpack the mind more, the mind, time, and the mind isn't equal. So you all know the image of an iceberg for the mind, and how our
Mm,
conscious mind is the little part that's above, the ocean level, and so
mm,
that's the conscious mind. And then we go deeper into the mind, that next layer down is our subconscious, and then we go down to the unconscious, then we go to the collective unconscious, and it just keeps going. But what I think is really cool in line with this question is that our conscious mind does work with more chronos and chronological time, and like the time on our watch where tick tick tick, and is more linear time. And then the subconscious is in this weird space in between these two, because it's more circular time.
mm,
And so there is this actually a whole other experience of time. That's why our dreams feel so weird with the times when we're sleeping,
mm,
our subconscious. And then unconscious, the experience of time is just like, we can't even really fathom what it is. So that question, kids, that conscious, rational part of their mind hasn't been developed yet. So you're 100% right. Their experience of time isn't the way we
mm.
have time. So for any parents and grandparents, that's why it's so frustrating at times with kids, because in our mind, it makes so much sense, and it makes
Right.
logical, sequential sense.
Uh-huh.
They are not in that reality at all.
Mm,
And so you're 100% right. And that's part of why I say, we're born into wonder and we're educated out of it. And I don't mean education, only from formal education, just from life, from, becoming an adult. And we start to spend more and more and more time in that conscious space and just this part of our brain. And so we just experience life and time, tick, 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 and the swirling of dreams. And that's why the I in SIFT imagination, it will change your experience with time. When you're on
mm,
a horse and you connect the way you've talked about it, Josh, time changes
mm-hmm,
because you're in a different state with that.
mm. Well, it becomes so saturated with depth. And I feel like that's where time shifts for me is when the more depth is saturated with the experience, it's like it does something to time.
It
You
really
know,
does.
yeah, it could seem sometimes like time just flies by, or sometimes it gets like the experience was so rich, it seemed like a lot of time passed. But yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, another
Research goes into that a whole bunch, but yeah, that's the changes in our experience.
cool. Wondering, exploring possibilities sounds like play. Playing with
Yep.
my horses is a state of joy and exploration of what might happen when I offer this and they respond freely. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And that's what I mean. I would be so curious about when you open to a state of wonder, when you are in a state of wonderment and you connect with your horse, how's your horse going to respond to that? I have no idea.
Mhm,
Josh, you probably have more of an idea, maybe, but like
mm,
that to me is that unknown. And it is playing with possibilities of like, I really wonder that. I really want to hear
mhm.
from you about that, because I think
Yeah.
it's very interesting.
I think there's more to come, John.
Mhm.
Mm. Kylie says you can't handle complex challenges with more complexity because that part of your brain is going offline. Love that. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, very cool. I'm hoping that some of you are taking some notes because this is all stuff that would be just so great to dive into a little more. There's a question. Did you look at brain chemicals in the study of wonder and using SIFT?
Yeah, great one. Yeah, brain chemicals are insanely powerful. We know a little bit about them,
Mm,
and so much yet to be discovered and uncovered. And yeah, I've got uh, particular curiosities around the brain chemicals and learning,
mm,
and in particular, when we are engaging in something important in the learning process, and a teacher could observe that, but you can as well. We can actually pin that moment, and the neurochemistry at that time will take a snapshot, and it'll be remembered. And my real interest in that is then after that training session, that performance or whatever, there's a post-performance protocol that I work with people where you go through a deep relaxation and you call that moment back in, and in such an incredible way, your body, your brain lines up that neurochemistry in the exact way it was, like the fingerprint it was in that moment when you learned that. So when you stepped from that known ability to known possibility, when you actually did that, you can prime that moment and be like, oh yeah, let's remember this, because it's so juicy. And but in terms of learning, it's so amazing, because then afterwards you can deepen the learning at the cellular level, at at every level, and you actually reorganize your system to that moment of improvement.
Hmm. Hmm. Amazing.
Hmm.
Amazing. Another one, just sharing some thoughts. Maybe horses get traumatized by not understanding that their humans do not recognize their state of play, wonder, and joy, and get negative responses. So that is why they respond so well to it when a human shows up in that state. Very cool. Interesting. I was putting hay out. It's getting cold here, and the snow's on the ground now. We had snow yesterday morning, and had to put out some hay. And the horses get so excited about that, and they're it just brought me back to that, because they were running and jumping and bucking and kicking, almost okay, it's like the Wiggles for a horse, but in running and motion and with no restriction. It's like, I'm never going to look at that the same. I'm never going to look at that the same, because it's just such an embodiment of whatever they feel. It's like so much energy gets moved. And to me, it almost feels like somehow that attaches to our own body mapping, because I've wondered how that
Hmm.
infuses for people, but it's almost like by movement, just free, uncontrolled, or I don't know, just liberated movement. It's like
Hmm.
you almost can shake out the stuckness, it seems. And it's just like, I just watched my horses do that this afternoon, which is so cool.
And that's it. I mean, I mentioned qigong as that aspect, but it's in
Uh,
somatic experiencing.
right.
It's in any body-centered therapy, that is that unstucking, right? And all that
Mm-hmm.
work of our fascia in the moment of a trauma gets tight and it holds that, right? The body keeps the score, all that. And so when we move in line with our in the moment, our intrinsic, this is that childlike sense of wonder, just allowing that movement to come out, that is healing.
Mm-hmm.
It's therapy. And whether it's like a known trauma or it doesn't matter, it's just a therapeutic moment. So
Mm-hmm.
the horses smelling, feeling, anticipating the hay, and then they're just like, wow, to
Yeah.
allow to express it. That's it.
Yeah. Beautiful. Riding and working with horses is like going down a ski slope to a huge jump and not knowing when the jump is going to move position just before you get to the base of it. Uh, LOL. Yes, this sounds a lot like the yogic principles of how to live a good life. Kind of a statement, I guess, there. Very cool. Um, my therapist gave a tool to my daughter and I when one of us, or both, was getting triggered and into conflict. And this is to play patty cake, as it is impossible to do that and stay stuck in the trauma loop, and takes us to a childlike space. That's pretty cool.
No, love it. Play patty cake with the horse.
Yeah. We'll get back to you on how that goes.
Yeah.
We use many of these principles working with kids clinically. Approaching the experiences we share with them from a state of wonder stops us from making assumptions. I am noticing that most of us have no problem moving our bodies either. LOL. Yeah, cool.
Mhm.
Maybe last one here. Do you think horses exist in a state of wonder and reserve a small sector for reactiveness? That's interesting.
Nice. That's a great question. my initial spontaneous thought about that is the minds of animals and how unrestricted they are in some
Mm-hmm.
way,
Mm-hmm.
right? With the level of awareness, consciousness, connection they have, they don't hang on to garbage. Like find a stressed cat that,
Yeah.
if no stressor around, find a stressed cat, right? Like they just don't really hold on to it so much. But do they exist in a state of wonder from the way I'm describing it as like open to possibilities? I
Mm,
think that's a question for each of you and for Josh. Like for
mm-hmm.
me, like wonder
Mm-hmm.
is that state of possibilities. So
Mm.
I don't know, what's your initial thought on that one, Josh?
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a really good question because the horses live, they do live in a state of possibility. And I think it's more of, so uh, when they're triggered and when they're just in a state, like in a relaxed state, I think those are the differences. And I think one of the things that our goal is actually to create more space for our horses to feel safe. And when they are in that state, when they're in that space, their mind is so big. Their heart frequency is like 4,000 times. There's different numbers out there around the heart math stuff, but and the power of their presence when there is stillness is just absolutely healing. And
Mm,
I think the expanse of what's actually going on there when a horse is calm, that you want to talk about opening to possibility. There is a massive amount of unknown around the power of a calm horse or a still horse and how they exist. But it almost seems like it happens not actively. I
mm,
think here we're talking about learned
right,
principles. Like we
yeah,
can learn, right? When I
yeah,
almost maybe more like kids, where it's like the horses are just there. They're just
yeah,
kind of there. They're not trying to. I think at this state we're kind of returning ourselves back, and I don't think the horses actually do that.
yeah,
Um, it's almost as if they just are, you
yeah.
know,
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and Lisa just mentioned like, not so sure about prey animals in terms of that,
right.
kind of state. And I think you really touched on something there with that stillness that,
Hmm.
you see a squirrel, in a tree or on a fence, and it's like constantly just, hyper vigilant. But maybe in its home when it's fully burrowed and in that space, then, maybe there
Hmm.
is that connection between stillness and for sure, another element of our mind is the hardware, software, and then us as the user. Like
Right.
the hardware that a creature has does inform obviously the relationship it has with the world. And so, a slug compared to a dolphin,
Yeah.
just from a hardware standpoint, the size of the brain of the
Right.
dolphin, like
Right.
no creature plays more that we know of than dolphins. And
Mm.
the way that they love and the way that they connect
Hmm.
is in part by the size of their brains and their use of it, and probably
Hmm.
more so than the size of their brains, but the way they use it. But yeah, smaller critters
Amazing.
and other animals, the hardware of it is definitely going to inform what we're talking about.
Yeah. Felicity just mentioned something very cool. I believe they do live in a state of wonder as I see the curiosity, play, and joy in my foals and young horses. Everything is full of wonder, but like us, it is educated out of them. And I think that's
Mm.
probably, that it's an unfortunate reality in the training of horses is where, we even call a horse that is schooled, we call them broke,
Yeah,
and that's a crazy terminology that we just kind of pass around, but it really is, the a broke horse is almost like a kid who has gone through the school system and now has no opinion, like they're not creative, they're kind of just a system. um yeah, it's a, and a horse would be the same. So I think that there's a space where, and I think that would be our greatest goal with our horses, is to meet their needs and
mm,
not need to necessarily control them, as we look at leadership as creating a space that the horse would like to draw to rather than creating a controlling environment.
right.
If the horse doesn't feel safe with you, you have to control them. But as you meet their needs and create an energetic environment where the horse feels safe, then they desire the work. It's really a cool thing. So it's that um, allowing by the space you create. So wow, so cool. Can you just, how do you do your work? Like you're talking about some of the people that you work with. Is this a Like, is this a space where people can connect with you and go through process, or are you, I just love to hear more about how you've turned this into what you call work.
Yeah. Nice, thanks. Yeah, I wonder that too, most days. And it's emerging and evolving, thankfully, and by design, by being, in a space of wonder. And
Mm,
I feel so fortunate for, the last 15 to 20 years working quite extensively, mainly with Olympic, Paralympic athletes, and
mm,
so high performers in more of the professional athletic world, and now I'm in a process of opening quite a bit. And so the website that I operate with is freeflowpractice.com, and there's courses that are coming out now. We're
cool.
getting different courses for that online work. I've got another big project that I won't speak to just yet because it's way at the beginning stages of wonder, but that's there. And yeah, then I do work one-on-one with folks as well. But
Mm,
so yeah, I think through that website or through that John at freeflowpractice.com is my direct email. And
cool.
and please feel free to email with any thoughts about this convo that we had, any
Mhm.
questions, any ideas, whatever. And so yeah, that email and then that website are kind of the two best doorways for now. And yeah, there's lots more in the works and coming that I'm very excited about, especially and including, it sounds like, a trip to come hang out with you, Josh, and
Oh yeah.
your students, which I'm inviting myself.
Yeah, no, I was already thinking it. I think there's just more fun to be had with this desire to live free from the restrictions of life and live inside of what it means to be in relationship with ourselves and with our horses, and to come back to a place of possibility. To And I just love how wonder is kind of just a gateway and a doorway to that. I love I love that the skill is using wonder over the moment. That's just so liberating, so liberating. Very cool. So yes, I think we'll be doing some things. I really look forward to that, John. And then we also have my Facebook group. So I have a group where all of my students are, connected, and maybe we'll end up chatting on there as well. I can get you onto that as well, John, if you're willing. There's lots of great relational based conversations from a variety of forms. So that's a fun thing that we kind of already have going on, that wouldn't that you can kind of jump in on when you have the time. So that's really cool.
Sounds fun.
Well, man, thank you so much, John, for carving out some time and being here to share. And I can guarantee that nobody's going to be leaving here unchanged. That's what a beautiful blessing that you've been able to share with us, and from your work and your heart that you've poured into this has just been an absolute blessing.
Oh, thanks, Josh. I really appreciate that. Thanks to everyone for popping on. Hi,
Yeah.
Chloe. Hi, Rob. I can see you guys on my screen. It's great to see you guys. So, so great.
Cool.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thanks so
Okay.
much. Thanks, everybody. It's been really, really fun. And yeah, I hope it's, like you said, Josh, touched you in some way. And,
Yeah.
you know, in it that it has. At the very least, maybe you'll think, huh, I wonder, or the next time you say I
Right.
wonder, it might have a little bit of a different tone to open to possibilities, that word, that state, and the skill
Yeah. I think that you've changed that for everybody.
thing.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm just so glad that this worked out. This was a bit of a wonder thing for us to kind of throw this together this way. It's kind of a different venue to from a podcast or a whatever, just to be able to share the space. And for me, that's just such a thing. Is I believe there's so much impact when we can share space together, different than just John and I talking and then you guys watching that. So I hope that was valuable to you guys, actually being involved in the conversation and being able to share. I hope that actually heightened the impact of John's wisdom to all of you, to be directly involved. So, anyways, thank you everyone for coming. This will be recorded. I'm not exactly sure it is recorded. I'm not exactly sure how we're gonna what that'll be used or looked at, but John and I'll talk and we'll see. But thank you again. And we're going to start a post on the Facebook group so that people can share. I'd love to have everybody share maybe something that they learned, so we could all remember, because we're not all going to remember all of the parts. So thanks again, guys. Thank you, John. And I hope everyone has a great night. Mhm. Bye, guys.